Do you ever wonder if you're parenting your child in the best way? You may just do what comes naturally to you or what your parents did with you, but it's actually very important to understand how the way that you interact with your child affects their development, because different parenting styles can lead to very different levels of health and wellness for your child as they become an adult. And you can make small changes now that will have a huge impact on your child's future. Now, there are a lot of different parenting styles that you may have heard about in the popular media, things like helicopter parents and free-range parents and bulldozer parents. And those are all very entertaining terms and easy to visualize so that you can think of what kind of parent that would be. However, when research in psychology tries to sort out what are the core parenting styles that you see across people universally in their parenting, we have decades of data to support the fact that there are 4 primary parenting styles, going back to research by Diana Baumrind in the 1960s. So identifying those 4 styles makes it really helpful to be able to do research and look at these long-term outcomes of kids. Now, as a mom of 4, I've been there thinking, did I handle that situation correctly? Or could I have said that differently and gotten a better result? And knowing about these 4 parenting styles always helps me to feel confident in the choices that I make as a parent. So today, I'm going to share an overview of each of the 4 main parenting styles in psychology research and let you know what the research says about how children raised in each of those 4 styles tend to turn out as adults, to help guide you in how you want to choose to parent your child. First, the authoritarian parenting style is an extremely strict style of parenting. It's focused on rules and obedience with little use of positive feedback. Now, it's really helpful here to use a graph to help show 4 quadrants and visualize the 4 different parenting styles. And on our graph, there are 2 main factors. So these are dimensions that range from high to low. So it's not just yes or no, do you have this quality in your parenting? It's how much of that quality, very high in that factor or very low. And the first main factor runs from top to bottom on our graph, and that is demandingness. And it's kind of a funny term, but if you're very high on that factor, then you're very demanding. If you're very low on that factor towards the bottom on the graph, then you're undemanding. So let's talk about some everyday examples of things that test your parental demandingness. So things like having your child put your shoes away, or clean their room, or turn off the TV. And if you're high in demandingness and you're dealing with these day-to-day parenting situations, things must be done right away with no complaint. If you're kind of medium on demandingness, then it must be done by a set deadline, but there's not really a lot of stress involved. Or if you're low in demandingness, then it may just be whenever they get to it is fine. Now, there are a lot of other factors involved, things like how much parental supervision you're offering your child in completing those tasks, how willing your child is to complete the task, so how much you really have to intervene as a parent, how willing you are to get involved in when your child does disobey and you feel like you need to step in with more discipline, and what kind of discipline you're comfortable with. So those are all factors that would help place you at a certain point on the demandingness factor there. Okay, so now let's look at responsiveness. So this is the second factor that goes from left to right on our graph. And so responsiveness has to do with being sensitive, supportive, and receptive to your child's individual needs and demands. We have Misty coming to visit us today. So if you notice the emphasis there on promoting your child's individuality, so that's a lot more than just being warm in your parenting, but it's also accepting their individuality, which is a really important factor there in how responsive you are in your parenting. So if you're high in responsiveness, you tend to respond in a more loving and empathetic way. You might say something like, "Oh, sweetie, I know it's hard to rally on Monday mornings. What's one thing that might be fun about school today?" to help shift things on a more positive note. Or if you're medium in responsiveness, you might say something like, "Yeah, it's another Monday. Let's get going." Or if you're low in responsiveness, you might say something like, "Too bad, it's Monday and we're leaving in 5 minutes." So when we talk about the first parenting style, the authoritarian parenting style, we're talking about being strict, rule-focused, must maintain order. This is high in demandingness, and this limits your child's autonomy. It's trying to shape your child to your way rather than letting them be themselves. And it's also offering little positive feedback and warmth, which means it's low in responsiveness. So this is the top right corner of the graph. Now, children raised by authoritarian parents are often not permitted to freely express their emotions. They may be punished for asserting their independence, and they're held to a very high standard. So in response, they learn to suppress their emotions and follow the rules to avoid harsh punishments. They don't get enough experience making decisions and taking responsibilities for their actions. And so as adults, what you tend to find is that it's hard for them to truly understand their feelings, their wants, and their desires. And instead, they're led by their family or social norms, and they follow the path that is scripted for them. If you were raised in an authoritarian parenting style, you may not have fond memories of your family home, and chances are you strive to raise your children differently. But let me know if you had a different reaction. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Second, the indifferent parenting style, or sometimes called the neglectful parenting style, in contrast, is not limit setting, but it's also not nurturing or loving. So let's take a look at our graph. You find that indifferent parents are definitely not strict or rule-focused because they're just not very present or really involved at all in their children's lives. So they're low in demandingness. Also, they show little positive feedback or warmth, and they give little individual attention to their child. So overall, they're not very interested in their child, which makes them low in responsiveness. So this may be due to lack of time, lack of energy, or just being self-focused. But it could also be due to other factors like extreme poverty, mental illness, unemployment, marital distress, or other stressors in your life. So when we look at our graph, this falls into the bottom right corner of the graph for indifferent parenting. Now, let's have a little disclaimer here. We're talking in extremes. We're saying, very low in responsiveness, very low in demandingness. That puts you as indifferent. But of course, there's a range within that quadrant of the graph. You could be in the bottom corner, or you could be a little bit more in the middle, or a little closer to the center. So people are going to differ. But for the sake of psychology research, we have to categorize people into 4 different groups. That way we can say, okay, let's look at this group and see what happens in the long run for their kids. So it's a really helpful thing in research to be able to categorize people. Whereas in real life, you may find a lot more variability. Well, they tend to be a little indifferent, but not to this extreme. And then, of course, there are other important factors that can affect child's outcome, like what culture are they raised in, what neighborhood are they raised in, how much extended family support do they have. But separated into these 4 parenting styles allows us to find trends. Parents who tend to be indifferent tend to have kids who do such and such. We'll talk about that next. So children raised by indifferent or neglectful parents start to feel like it doesn't matter what they do because nobody cares anyway. And they develop a negative self-image, and they may develop trust issues in themselves and also in others. So as an adult, that looks like people who are unable to form healthy relationships, have poorly controlled emotions, and are more prone to substance abuse. So keep in mind that these research findings tell us about general tendencies of kids raised in particular environments, but there are, of course, exceptions to the rule. So overall, being raised by indifferent parents tends to be a bad experience and something that you wouldn't want to repeat for your own kids. And don't worry, there is a really great parenting style coming up momentarily. But first, let's touch on our third style, the permissive parenting style. So this is a very nurturing style with little focus on setting limits or monitoring children's activities. So if we look at our graph, for the permissive style, we have parents who are not very strict or rule-focused, so that makes them low in demandingness. We have lots of positive feedback and warmth and acceptance, so they're high in responsiveness. So if you look at our graph, that's the bottom left corner of the graph. Now, children raised by permissive parents don't often hear no in their household, so they tend to get whatever they want, whether it's, this new toy or dessert every night or playing video games for as long as they want or going to bed whenever they want. Children of permissive parents tend to show more of what we might call unwanted child behaviors like talking back or throwing a fit or even aggression, because they tolerate these behaviors out of fear that if they were to set limits on their child, that it might infringe their child's autonomy. And as a result, as adults, these kids then can be inconsiderate of other people's feelings, have a hard time following social norms, be sore losers, and have a hard time setting healthy limits for themselves. So while every child probably dreams of being raised in a permissive home with no limits, in reality, this style robs your child of a chance to become self-reliant and to learn to cope with stressors. So if your goal is to raise a child to become a healthy adult, this is probably not the parenting style that you want to use either. Finally, I saved the best for last. The authoritative parenting style uses rules and monitors children's behavior in a loving and supportive way. So this is our fourth parenting style. The authoritative parent is strict and rule-focused, so they are high in demandingness. But the rules are meant to guide children and teach them, not to control them or to punish them. Authoritative parents encourage independence within limits. And this limit setting is balanced by high positive feedback and warmth. So that makes them high in responsiveness. So here we find that authoritative parents fall into the top left corner of the graph. And so children raised by authoritative parents learn that some things in life are difficult, but their parents will always be there to support them, which helps to build resilience so they can overcome more stressors and adversity throughout their lives. They learn to respect authority while also developing a sense of autonomy and who they are as individuals. They feel comfortable asking questions and asking for help when needed. And as adults, we find that they're well-adjusted, they're independent, they're self-reliant, and they have fewer substance abuse and mental health problems. Now, of course, there are kids raised by parents from each style who turn out great, and kids raised by authoritative parents who later have troubles. But research consistently shows that on the average, authoritarian parents and permissive parents and indifferent parents tend to raise kids who have more trouble as adults, whereas authoritative parents tend to produce happy, well-adjusted kids who become thriving adults. And that makes me feel really good about choosing to be an authoritative parent. Now let's talk for a minute about that term, authoritative parenting. It is not my favorite term. I find it very similar to authoritarian parenting and often say the wrong thing and have to really think which is which. So authoritarian, very strict and not warm. Authoritative, good. You have limits that are set to teach children and you pair it with warmth and acceptance. But I tend not to use that term because it's so confusing. So when I talk with parents in my coaching program about the authoritative parenting style, I call it amazing parenting. And that's my way of speaking about the way that I encourage parents to raise their children with warmth, acceptance, and reasonable, healthy boundaries that are upheld when needed. We all want the best for our kids now and in the future. And you can see that the key to success when it comes to parenting style is balancing your demands with your warmth and acceptance. Now, if you're wondering how to find that winning combination of firm but loving, you're in luck because my next video will teach you how to set healthy boundaries for your child. Keep up the good work on your amazing parenting journey.